let's jump right into this explainer, because today we are tackling a massive paradigm shift. When motivation isn't an intervention, but an emergent systemic property. Basically, we're challenging a deeply held, universally accepted assumption. The idea that leadership is just something you actively do to people. So think about this. Is motivating actually a universal leadership intervention? Because the traditional assumption usually paints a picture of a leader standing at the top, just projecting motivation downward toward these passive receivers. It's this ingrained idea that a leader absolutely must actively project energy to build a successful organization. We kind of treat it like a lever, right? Team seems uninspired, just pull the motivation lever. Bring in a hype speaker, give a rousing speech, set some aggressive new target. But what if treating motivation as this universal one-size-fits-all intervention is actually the exact thing breaking your most advanced teams?
Well, check out this frankly jarring data anomaly. We are looking at a statistically significant negative Pearson correlation of -0.0732. And this isn't a small sample. This is drawn from a massive data set spanning 98 countries, 25 languages, and over 3,100 responses. What we're zeroing in on here is spiral dynamics theory, specifically looking at the yellow value system, or vMEME. Now, the yellow stage represents individuals and systems that operate through a lens of systemic complexity and adaptive emergence. And the data clearly shows that people operating in this yellow stage actually actively deprioritize motivating as a key leadership quality. Let that sink in for a second. The absolute most complex, systems-oriented thinkers in your organization literally do not want you to motivate them. So why? Do they just hate being engaged? No, not at all.
To really grasp what's happening here, we need to define the core paradigm shift. It boils down to motivation as an intervention versus motivation as an emergent property. Traditional leadership totally sees motivation as a top-down tool applied to a team, almost like an external force. But that yellow systemic lens, it sees it completely differently. In a complex adaptive system, motivation isn't a liquid you can just inject into people. Instead, it's a natural, emergent outcome of a properly aligned system. Basically, if the system is designed well, if constraints are clear, and if information is flowing freely, motivation just naturally emerges on its own. You don't apply it, you design the conditions for it to exist.
Now, you might initially think this means these systems thinkers reject engagement entirely, but the data totally proves otherwise. Yellow highly values a leader being a clear communicator, an active listener, and being empathetic. The difference really lies in how they view these tools. For them, communication and listening are bidirectional flow enablers. They're mechanisms to gather data and keep the system healthy. And empathy? That's an adaptive connection. But motivating? Well, that remains negatively correlated. Because while listening and communicating are about understanding the system, motivating feels like a blunt, top-down attempt to manipulate it. To actually visualize and manage these complex dynamics, leaders are increasingly turning to new tech. What's super interesting here is the SD Navigator model, which is actually part of this massive 2026 trend known as AI vibe coding. This is where users essentially instruct large language models in plain, natural language to build apps that can map these really complex psychological states, like fears and trust, within a dynamic programming model. But there is a huge catch here. Without spiral-literate prompts, AI can so easily fall into first-tier bias, basically misinterpreting all these nuanced metrics as just another set of basic performance indicators. A yellow dominant leader uses this kind of tech not to figure out where to launch blind motivational interventions, but to actively tune the systemic network based on real-time data. They model variables, like worldview profiles, to maximize system stability, ensuring that motivation can naturally emerge. Which brings us to a point that is captured perfectly by this idea. In complex systems, empathy is telemetry, not emotional theater. I absolutely love this concept. For the yellow vMEME, capturing emotional data isn't about performing compassion or holding hands in a circle. It's highly practical. It's about gathering critical information. You see, unmapped emotions are essentially dark nodes. They inject noise and delay your feedback loops. So when a systems thinker asks how you're doing, they are literally checking the telemetry of the organization. They are trying to understand the health and flow of the entire system. Empathy becomes a set of vital data points used to optimize the environment so that, again, motivation can emerge naturally.
To really highlight just how different this approach is, let's quickly contrast yellow with two other super common corporate value systems, orange and green. Orange is that classic meritocratic, achievement-focused mindset. To an orange thinker, motivation is a results-driven influence tool used to accelerate performance and strategic momentum. It's all about KPIs, targets, and bonuses. Green, on the other hand, is the community-focused, inclusive mindset. To green, motivation is empathetic connection. It's relational energy that fuels collective engagement, making sure everyone feels valued. Now, notice how both orange and green see motivation as something a leader actively creates or applies. Yellow steps completely outside that box. For yellow, it is purely an emergent property of an adaptive alignment. It's the exact same leadership quality, but with three completely divergent interpretations.
So, what actually happens when an organization doesn't get this? Well, there's a serious cost to that misalignment. When your leadership frameworks treat motivating as a universal tactic, friction is absolutely inevitable. Your leadership development programs end up completely misaligned with the expectations of your most complex thinkers. Your team building metrics, they just capture hollow activity, like, how many people showed up to the mandatory Friday pizza party, instead of capturing real adaptive capacity. The system experiences what's known as emergence anchor dissolution. Basically, the foundational trust required for natural motivation just evaporates. Highly complex yellow thinkers see these reductive motivation frameworks, and it instantly triggers systemic skepticism. They look at a leader trying to artificially motivate them and just think, wow, you really don't understand this system at all.
Let's trace exactly how this plays out in the real world. We call this the escalation of systemic drift, and it happens in 4 steps. It starts at step 1. The interventionist framing is applied. A well-meaning leader comes in and tries to actively motivate the team from the top down. Step 2, this immediately triggers that systemic skepticism among the yellow thinkers we just talked about. Step 3 is honestly the most dangerous. Performative engagement begins. The team smiles, they nod, they play along with the motivational exercise because they know it's exactly what the leader wants to see. And finally, step 4, silent emergence drift takes over. The crazy thing is, misapplied motivation doesn't result in some dramatic explosion or a sudden mass walkout. It is a quiet, creeping systemic fracture. People might appear engaged on the surface, but they have completely disconnected from the adaptive capacity of the organization. Which brings us to the core synthesis of this whole explainer. Motivation becomes manipulation, not enablement, when applied without systemic literacy. If you try to force motivation onto a complex system that actually just needs structural alignment, you are guaranteed to erode trust. You aren't enabling your team, you're unintentionally manipulating them, and your most advanced systems thinking employees will see right through the whole shebang. They honestly don't want your speeches. They want you to clear the roadblocks and remove the friction in the system so they can just do their absolute best work. So I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to take back to your own teams. What actually breaks when you treat motivation as a lever instead of an emergent outcome? I highly encourage you to take a hard look at your own organizational design. Are you constantly exhausting yourself trying to pull that motivation lever, or are you designing for systemic emergence, allowing motivation to naturally rise up from a healthy, perfectly aligned organization? It's a fundamental shift in how we think about leadership, and as the data proves, it's a shift we literally can no longer afford to ignore. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning those universal assumptions.